In 2019, I moved from a small city in Spain to Hamburg, Germany, to start a new position as a technical consultant in a company that I had managed to convince with my patchy German that it was worth the hassle hiring someone to whom you had to repeat things twice. I cannot lie and say that this experience was easy. I don't think I have ever sweated as much in my life as I did during that online interview, in which the CEO of the company would throw 100 questions at me as I struggled to respond them in German. Prior to the interview, I was mildly concerned about the tech side of the interview. But when the process started, I quickly realized how much more horrifyingly difficult it was to have to improvise responses to personal questions. After 3 minutes of me struggling my way through a stupid anecdote about a business trip in Morocco, I begged for a straightforward question about cloud architecture. But somehow I was successful, and I got the job, which allowed me to permanently move to Germany, a country that I had dreamed of working in for a long time. The rosy ideal of the EU set firmly in my mind as one of the greatest political experiments of the modern age. And to a large degree, I cannot say that my mind has changed about the benefits of being European. Simply put, the EU has given me everything. I studied in Scotland back when the UK was still part of the EU. I managed to work in Germany for over 3 years without any hassle, and now that I'm wondering on going back to Spain, once again I know it will be a smooth process. But in time, I have come to realize some fundamental errors in the way that the economic system of the EU is built up. It was then that I ran into the book that has inspired today's video, Joseph Stiglitz, The Euro, How a Common Currency Threatens the Future of Europe. And some of my fears found harbor in his ideas. Welcome to Rebel Economics. Today, we will look at the Euro-busting critique of the common currency proposed by the economic Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, its merits, its pitfalls, and where the EU might go from what it is today. If you enjoyed this content, please like and consider subscribing. I don't like saying this in every video, but it really does help us a lot when you do. So thank you. Economics Nobel Prize laureate Joseph Stiglitz has been very vocal about his opinions on the future of the European Union. He asserts that the euro has been a complete failure. The author focuses on the low growth experienced by its member countries since the creation of the single currency and establishes a causal relationship between this low growth and the existence of the single monetary currency. The GDP of the Eurozone, that is, a macroeconomic indicator to measure an economy's output, had practically stagnated until 2015 at its 2007 level, which in non-European countries and in the United States, the GDP had increased 8.1% and almost 10% respectively. Similarly, per capita income grew in that period by 3% in the United States, while it has experienced a fall of 1.8% in the euro area. And the unemployment rate in the latter has remained about 10% for the entire duration of the 2008 crisis, while the United States has managed to eventually get it below 5%. The reason for this failure lies in the fact that the structural differences between the member countries of the European Monetary Union are very high, which makes the existence of a single interest rate and a single exchange rate, essential elements of a single currency, undesirable. Following the classical economic model, a country only has two mechanisms to address high interest rates and a faltering economy. These are the levels that lawmakers can use to try to avoid a recession or solve a fundamental problem with a given part of the economy. These are monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy refers to a state's ability to tamper with the money supply, that is, the amount of money available in the system. The state can make more money by simply printing new cash. This is called quantitative easing, and it is an action that by the very nature of the monetary system, only central banks like the Federal Reserve in the US or the ECB in Europe can do. Additionally, monetary policy might be contractionary, through which the central bank takes money outside of the system with the objective of cooling down an economy that might be experiencing rampant inflation. As an example, in the United States, a contractionary policy is typically performed by raising the target federal funds rate, which is the interest rate banks charge each other overnight in order to meet their reserve requirements. When it comes to fiscal policy, though, this lever allows lawmakers to achieve some of the same objectives. Increasing taxes will take money outside of the system and into the state. That can redirect it to other sectors it finds might require the infusion of capital, thereby reducing the money supply and increasing interest rates, or reduce taxes, which increases the amount of money that remains in the system and reduces interest rates. However, these tools, the classical model tells us, are effective to solve particularly unfavorable economic situations when there is a cohesive and common underlying problem in the economy to which they are applied. At the end of the day, Stiglitz's criticism to the way the euro has tied all European countries under a single exchange rate and monetary supply radicates on this point. The EU is an extremely diverse group of countries. Some might even say that it is one of the most heterogeneous single markets with a common currency in the world. And it is true. Under the euro, economies from ex-Soviet republics, Mediterranean countries, and continental superpowers like Germany are tied together and made to dance by the same music. The issue, of course, is that the inherent differences that underlie countries that have not gone through a process of economic and political integration to belong into a larger bloc are simply not similar enough for traditional efforts of monetary and fiscal policy to work satisfactorily. There are fundamental differences in how the economies in the EU perform, from size, seasonality, median age, median wages, tax structure, weaknesses of the main producing sector, energy dependence, and unilateral trade agreements. So, essentially the point is this. The EU is too heterogeneous for single effort monetary fiscal policies to work in every country, since what would be successful in one is not successful in the others. This can be encapsulated in a cry that the Spanish working class had during the grueling years of the 2008 recession, where the European Troika demanded Spain to remain frugal and increase taxes as the economy crumbled to pieces, essentially only because for the core of the EU that was the required strategy. I don't think I will ever forget the fury with which protesters screamed, "Queremos alemanes en Mallorca, no en Madrid. We want Germans in Mallorca, not in Madrid." This scream represents the fury of countries who believe that the single currency curtails their options and caters to the neoclassical elites of the continental core, which they believe made decisions only looking at what works in Berlin and try to apply it to Barcelona. This situation generates an intrinsic instability in the functioning of the euro area, which became fully visible after the outbreak of the 2008 financial crisis. The argument goes as follows. Given the structural differences between the countries, a single interest rates end up being too high for some countries and too low for others. In the European case, it can be seen how, in the early years of the euro, the interest rates set by the European Central Bank would have been determined according to the macroeconomic situation of the largest economy in the area, that being Germany, characterized by low inflation and growth in that period. This interest rate was, however, excessively low for other countries, in particular for the so-called peripheral ones, which led to an overheating of their economies, accompanied by an excessive indebtedness, both internal and external, and to the generation of bubbles in the real estate sector. It must be said that the United States, a constant backdrop of comparison for the EU, is also a very heterogeneous country. But in this case, proponents of Stiglitz's theory argue that the US had at its reach 3 adjustment mechanisms that allow for macroeconomic stabilization of the different states when disturbances occur. These mechanisms do not exist, at least to the same extent, in the case of the euro. Firstly, labor mobility between the different US states is very high, so that when one state suffers an increase in unemployment, workers move quickly to another state, helping to stabilize the labor market situation in the country as a whole. In his thesis, Stiglitz ferociously criticizes the low real intra-mobility of workers within the EU, and how it, compared to the US's more dynamic labor market, is yet another sign of the European experiment's failings. However, in recent years since the publication of his ardent critique, intra-EU mobility continues to increase. In my case, I have personally recently spent 3 years living in Germany, where not only I made more money working as a consultant, but had more opportunities to work than I would had I stayed in my home country. When it comes to criticizing the dynamic nature of the labor market in the EU, while I can sympathize with the defenders of this theory, as they compare it to the American one, I have to argue against it. The data simply points to the opposite direction, with fundamental year-on-year increases in intra-EU labor travel. Now, of course Germany and the central countries receive a disproportionate amount of these workers, but such is the nature when higher wages are just one flight away. A good argument that could offer some more validity to Stiglitz's initial analysis would be the asymmetric nature of labor emigrating across the EU. Highly qualified individuals, particularly doctors, nurses, and other professionals of technological sectors with knowledge of either English or the host country's official language, tend to flow from lower-earning countries like the Eastern and Mediterranean states towards the central ones. The reason for this is obvious. Beyond the aforementioned higher real wages, in many cases the technological and other sectors that suffer this massive brain drain are woefully underfunded and minimized in the outside states of the Mediterranean and the East. So many young professionals think of Berlin and Amsterdam the same way that a brilliant microprocessor architect in Arizona thinks of Silicon Valley. Additionally, Stiglitz also argues that the United States has a very large federal budget, which enables it to implement powerful stabilizing fiscal policies in the event of an economic slowdown in the country as a whole or only in some states. In particular, the US federal budget accounts, on average during the previous decade, for 20% of the GDP, whereas the EU budget represented only 1% of the GDP. In the United States, the banking system is essentially national, so that when a financial institution gets into trouble, the potential bailout is borne by the country as a whole. Again, this situation contrasts with that in Europe, where each country remains responsible for the challenges of its financial system. Now, European countries might borrow from member states and the European Central Bank to achieve this, and they do. But these debt schemes to compensate for a failing financial entity might bring in more trouble, essentially by shifting the debt burden from the bank to the state, who now owns or partially owns a financial entity on the hook for large amounts of cash to the rest of the European members. The state cannot choose to devaluate its currency to pay off such exorbitant debts, since its creditors also partake on the currency's value, not to mention that the state in question simply cannot do this, because it is the European Central Bank that both owns the debt and the monetary levers. Stiglitz's critique is certainly a brutal one, merciless, and as many economists that oppose this theory will be quickly to point out, not very well defended with data. From my perspective, it should be clear to everyone that the EU is not the shining beacon of 21st century Europeanism that it was designed to be. And there is some merit to a few of the ideas mentioned. For example, the EU's economic integration has undoubtedly outpaced political integration, which makes the whole process of agreeing on cohesive monetary and fiscal policy a tedious and prolonged one. By the time an agreement is drafted and the ECB gets cracking, the problem at hand is much, much worse. As I mentioned, my life would not have been the same had Spain not been a member of the European Union. And economics aside, I do have an affection for the institution. But it is important to be critical with the things that we love. The EU is a husk, wanting to be cracked open to express its full potential. It could be so much more, and I hope that it succeeds. Thank you for watching Rebel Economics. The EU is a topic of great interest for me. And ever since I read Stiglitz's book, I wanted to talk about it. If you did enjoy it, why not subscribing and sticking around for another video? Perhaps you will find interesting our video on why you should only work 4 days a week, and how the data supports that this might be a good idea not only for you, but also for your employer. And in case you're in the mood for some interesting economic theories, why not check our video on the paradox of competition, or why competition might not always be as desirable as classical economists would like us to believe. Once again, thanks for dropping by, and I'll see you in the next video.